Barron Trump, son of the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump, had grown up surrounded by luxury. The Trump Tower, sprawling estates, private jets, and an endless string of exclusive events, his life had always been a world apart from most people's realities. From the outside, it seemed perfect. Money had always been available to solve any problem, and Barron never had to think twice about his future. But despite the wealth, power, and influence that came with his last name, Barron always felt like something was missing. He never understood exactly what it was, but deep down, he knew that there was a void that money couldn't fill. In the months following his father's presidency, Barron found himself navigating a new chapter of his life. His father's influence had started to fade, and with it so did the constant media attention that had once followed him everywhere. The glitz and glam of political power were behind him, but Barron was still haunted by a question that had started to linger more and more in his mind: what was the point of it all? It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Barron found himself at his father's Mar-a-Lago estate, staring out at the sprawling grounds. The golden sunlight reflected off the surface of the pool, and the soft rustling of the palm trees created a peaceful soundtrack. Yet, despite the tranquility, Barron felt uneasy. He sat alone in a lounge chair, running his fingers through his short hair, his eyes distant. For a young man with every material possession he could possibly want, he felt unfulfilled. "Barron," a voice called out from behind him. It was his mother, Melania Trump, her voice soft yet commanding, as always. She had been noticing the changes in her son over the past few months: the distant look in his eyes, the long hours spent alone in his room, the occasional sigh when he thought no one was watching. Barron turned to face her, offering a faint smile. "Hey, Mom. Is something on your mind?" she asked, walking over and sitting beside him. Barron hesitated, unsure how to put his feelings into words. His mother had always been a steady presence in his life, but even she couldn't understand the depth of what he was going through. "I don't know," he said slowly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I feel like there's something missing. Like I'm supposed to be doing something more, but I don't know what it is." Melania looked at him carefully, her expression thoughtful. "You've had everything you could ever want, Barron. Is it the money? The fame? What do you feel is lacking?" Barron sighed and leaned back in his chair. "It's not that. I know I've been given more than most people could ever dream of. But sometimes it feels like no matter how much money we have, or how many people know our name, there's something I'll never be able to change. And I don't know what to do about it." His mother nodded slowly. "That's a heavy thought for someone your age. But remember, the things money can't buy are often the things that matter most. And sometimes those things take time to understand." Barron stared out at the horizon, reflecting on her words. He had always been surrounded by people who wanted something from him, whether it was because of his family's wealth or the prestige that came with being part of the Trump legacy. But it wasn't those things that bothered him. It was the sense that, despite all of it, he was still just a young man trying to find his place in the world, unsure of where to go or who to be. As he sat there, Barron realized that his life had been built on the foundation of wealth, status, and expectations, but none of those things could provide the one thing he needed most: peace of mind. And that peace, Barron was beginning to understand, wasn't something that could be bought. The days after that conversation with his mother lingered in Barron's mind like a fog that he couldn't shake. His mother had always been a figure of grace and composure, but even her comforting words didn't seem to pierce through the heavy veil of confusion that clouded his thoughts. Barron had been accustomed to a life of certainty: his family's wealth, his father's influence, and the constant presence of people eager to align themselves with the Trumps. But for the first time in his life, Barron found himself questioning everything. He decided to take a step back from the familiar to clear his mind. So, Barron did something that shocked everyone around him. He took a break from the extravagant lifestyle he'd known all his life. He stepped away from the media attention, his family's estate, and the constant social obligations. Instead, he retreated to a small, secluded cabin in the Adirondacks. It wasn't anything fancy, just a cozy wooden house surrounded by nature. There were no staff, no photographers, and no publicists. It was just Barron, alone with his thoughts and the peace of the forest. The first few days were challenging. Barron felt an unfamiliar sense of isolation that was hard to ignore. He had spent so much of his life surrounded by people, by luxury, that the silence of the cabin felt deafening at first. No media attention, no social media posts, no parties or events. Just the sound of birds, rustling leaves, and the occasional snap of a twig in the distance. It was unsettling but also strangely calming. For the first time in years, Barron had nothing to distract him. The constant hum of wealth, fame, and family expectations had been replaced by the quiet, uninterrupted thoughts in his mind. And it was in that solitude that Barron began to confront something he'd been avoiding for years, the realization that there were things money couldn't fix. He remembered the moments from his childhood when he had longed for something more than the world of privilege he was born into. How many times had he wished for a simple life where he didn't have to live up to his family's expectations or the overwhelming public pressure? How many times had he longed to be treated like an individual, not a symbol of wealth and power? The truth was, Barron had spent much of his life hiding behind the walls of his father's empire, never truly knowing who he was beyond the title of Trump's son. One morning, as Barron sat on the porch of the cabin, the sun beginning to rise over the horizon, he felt a sudden wave of clarity. It wasn't the clarity he had expected, a grand epiphany about his purpose or the meaning of life. Instead, it was a quieter realization that all his life he had been chasing something that didn't exist. He had been chasing validation, success, and admiration. He had been taught to believe that those things mattered above all else. But now, sitting alone in the calm of the wilderness, he understood that those things would never give him the sense of fulfillment he truly craved. It wasn't the money or the fame that had been missing. It was something deeper. It was the sense of being seen for who he truly was, not for his last name or his wealth. It was the ability to find joy in the simple things, to experience life without the pressure of always being on. Barron realized that he had been so focused on external achievements, on living up to expectations, that he had lost sight of the most important thing, himself. The more Barron reflected on this, the more he understood the weight of his family's legacy. His father had built an empire, but in doing so, he had created a world that often overshadowed Barron's own identity. While Donald Trump had always been a larger-than-life figure, Barron was just beginning to recognize how much of his life had been shaped by that legacy. And it was no longer enough. Barron realized that his quest for meaning couldn't be solved by wealth or power. It couldn't be solved by trying to live up to his father's success or by following in anyone's footsteps. It was something he had to find within himself. But that was the challenge. How could he create his own path when he had been raised in the shadow of a giant? For the next few weeks, Barron spent his days exploring the forest, reading books, and meditating on the lessons he was learning. He started to understand the profound importance of connection, not just to people but to the world around him. He realized that while his father had taught him how to build an empire, it was nature and solitude that were teaching him how to build a life that was truly his own. As the weeks passed, Barron's time in the Adirondacks began to transform him. What had initially felt like isolation now felt like a much-needed release from the pressures of the outside world. His thoughts were no longer consumed by the endless expectations placed upon him. Instead, he was beginning to see things from a new perspective, one where the things he had once taken for granted, like his family's wealth and status, no longer held the same value. One of the most significant moments of reflection came on a cold, crisp evening. Barron had been sitting by a crackling fire, wrapped in a thick blanket, reading a book his mother had recommended. It was a biography of a man who had risen from poverty to achieve great success, but what had struck Barron was not the man's accomplishments but his journey, his struggles, his failures, and the deep humanity that came through in his story. The book spoke of the inner battles, the sense of inadequacy, and the search for meaning that drove this man to keep going despite everything. As Barron closed the book and stared into the fire, the warmth of the flames flickering in front of him, something inside him clicked. The man in the book had lived a life without the cushion of wealth or the safety net of fame. He had worked tirelessly for everything he had achieved, not because it was easy, but because it mattered to him on a personal level. Barron realized that for all his life he had never had to fight for anything. He had never known what it was like to wake up each day with nothing but the drive to succeed for his own reasons. He had always had everything handed to him on a silver platter. This realization stung, but it was also freeing. Barron began to see that while money could buy comfort, it could never buy fulfillment. It could buy status, but it couldn't buy respect. It could give him access to power, but it couldn't give him purpose. And more than anything, it could never buy him the peace of mind he had been searching for. As the days turned into weeks, Barron spent more time with himself. He began writing in a journal, something he had never really done before. He wrote about his frustrations, his hopes, and his fears. And the more he wrote, the more he uncovered the truth about his inner self, the part of him that had always been buried beneath the weight of his father's legacy, beneath the expectations of the world. One evening, while sitting by the lake near the cabin, Barron received a call from his father, Donald Trump. The phone call was brief but packed with the usual energy that defined the former president. His voice was boisterous and filled with authority, a stark contrast to Barron's newfound quiet. It was clear that Donald Trump was still very much involved in the world of politics and business, and he was eager to catch up with his son. "Barron, I just wanted to check in on you. How's the cabin life treating you?" Donald asked, his tone enthusiastic. Barron paused for a moment before answering, choosing his words carefully. "It's different. I've had a lot of time to think." "Think about what?" Donald pressed, a hint of concern in his voice. "You're the future, son. You can't waste time out there in the woods. People are counting on you." Barron's heart raced as he tried to find the right words. He had always admired his father's drive and ambition, but something about his words felt disconnected from what Barron had been experiencing. The pressure to live up to his family's legacy, to always be the future, seemed to conflict with the quiet peace he had found in the solitude of the forest. "I've been thinking about what really matters, Dad," Barron said slowly. "Not just the business, not just the name, but what I want out of life, what I need to feel fulfilled." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Barron could almost hear his father processing the words. "Fulfilled?" Donald said finally. "Look, Barron, we've always had everything we need. What more do you want?" Barron swallowed hard, trying to find the strength to explain himself. "It's not about stuff, Dad. It's about being happy. And not just happy because I have everything, but happy because I'm living a life that's true to who I am. Not who people expect me to be." Donald's voice softened for a moment. "I get it, son. You're figuring things out. But just remember, the world doesn't stop for you to find your peace. You're a Trump, and that means responsibility. People are counting on you." Barron nodded even though his father couldn't see him. "I know, Dad. But I need to figure out who I am first." The conversation ended soon after that, and Barron found himself standing in front of the lake, the reflection of the trees swaying in the water. He realized that the pressure to live up to his family's legacy would always be there. But for the first time, he also realized that he could choose how to respond to it. He didn't have to carry the weight of the Trump name like a burden. He could choose to carve out his own path, one that wasn't defined by wealth, fame, or public approval. Barron's time in the Adirondacks continued to shape his understanding of what truly mattered. He spent his days journaling, meditating, and reflecting on his past, present, and future. Every day he uncovered more about himself, the parts of him that had been buried beneath layers of expectation and the image of a young heir to a billionaire empire. But as much as Barron was learning, he knew that a new chapter of his life was beginning to unfold. He was beginning to see that his journey wasn't about rejecting his family's legacy, but about finding a way to embrace it on his own terms. One evening, after weeks of solitude, Barron received a message that jolted him back into the reality of the world he had left behind. It was from his mother, Melania. The message was brief but poignant. "Barron, your father is planning something big for you. He wants to announce a new initiative, something that will put you in the spotlight once again. He believes this could be the turning point for you, but I need you to think about what you truly want. Your path doesn't need to be his path." Reading his mother's message, Barron felt a sense of unease. For so long, his life had been dictated by his father's ambitions, by the people who saw him as a stepping stone to the Trump legacy. But now, more than ever, Barron realized that he needed to make his own decisions, decisions that would lead him to his own peace, not just another title or accolade. He decided it was time to return home, but this time he would return with a different mindset. Barron was no longer the silent observer, he was now an active participant in shaping his life, and he was determined not to let anyone, especially his father, decide his future for him. He knew it wouldn't be easy. In fact, it would likely be one of the hardest conversations he would ever have. Back in New York, Barron met with his father at Trump Tower. Donald Trump was his usual self, larger than life, full of energy, and brimming with ideas. The meeting was set up in one of the conference rooms with several of his father's associates present. As Barron entered the room, his father stood up and clapped him on the back. "Barron, there's my boy. You look good, kid. Got some good ideas for the future. I'm planning a major announcement, something big for you. It's time to get you back in the public eye. This will be huge, I promise you. The Trump name needs you." Barron could feel the weight of his father's words, the same pressure he had felt all his life. But this time, Barron wasn't just going to agree because it was expected. This time, he was going to be honest, even if it meant disappointing his father. "Dad," Barron began, his voice steady, "I've been thinking a lot about what you want from me, what everyone wants from me, but I've realized something." Donald raised an eyebrow, a hint of curiosity in his expression. "What's that, son?" Barron took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I don't want to follow the same path you took. I don't want to be a part of some big initiative just because it's expected. I want to find my own way. I want to make decisions based on what's right for me, not just what looks good for the Trump brand. There was a stunned silence in the room. For a moment, no one said anything. Barron could feel his heart racing, the pressure building as his father processed his words. Finally, Donald spoke, his voice measured, but with a touch of incredulity. Barron, you've got to understand something. This isn't just about you. This is about the legacy. About keeping the Trump name strong. People expect you to be a leader. People expect you to be successful, to carry the torch. I know, Dad, Barron replied softly. But I can't just do it for people. I have to do it for myself. Money, power, fame, they don't mean anything if you're not living a life that feels true to you. And right now, none of that feels right for me. Donald's face hardened slightly, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, something Barron hadn't seen before. Perhaps it was respect, or maybe something more complicated, but for the first time, Barron felt that his father understood. After a long pause, Donald spoke again, his tone more somber than before. I never wanted you to feel like you were trapped, Barron. If you want to do something different, then you do it. But don't forget, this family has built something, and we don't turn our backs on it. Barron nodded. I'm not turning my back on it, Dad. I'm just choosing to walk a different path. The conversation wasn't easy, and there were still many questions about Barron's future, but in that moment, Barron knew he had made a significant breakthrough. His father had always been the person who shaped his destiny, but for the first time, Barron had taken control of his own narrative. He wasn't running away from his family, but he was no longer going to be defined by it. The road ahead was unclear, and Barron knew it wouldn't be smooth. There would be challenges, and his decisions would likely raise eyebrows. But for the first time, Barron felt a sense of freedom, a freedom that came from realizing that no amount of wealth, fame, or power could replace the peace of knowing who you truly are. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet transformation. Barron, now back in the spotlight, was no longer the boy people thought they knew. The media noticed a difference, not in his wardrobe or speech, but in his demeanor. He was poised, authentic, and surprisingly self-assured for someone who had spent most of his life in the shadows of others. He declined the high-profile board positions his father had lined up. He turned down invitations to speak at political rallies and charity galas hosted by elite families. Instead, Barron made a bold decision, one that puzzled many and impressed others. He launched an initiative not with his name plastered across it, but anonymously at first. The project focused on mental health awareness and emotional resilience among youth in elite families, those often overlooked in discussions of trauma and struggle because of the privilege they are born into. He called the initiative Unmasked. Its mission was simple yet profound, to create a safe space where young people born into wealth and influence could talk openly about the pressures they faced, the expectations, the loneliness, and the depression often hidden behind designer clothes and elite schools. For Barron, this wasn't just a project, it was personal. He began speaking privately to groups of students at exclusive prep schools using only his first name. His story resonated deeply with many. He talked about the nights he lay awake questioning his purpose, the suffocating burden of legacy, and the moment he realized that what he needed most wasn't applause or affirmation, but connection. It didn't take long for the world to connect the dots. Once the media discovered Barron Trump was the voice behind Unmasked, headlines exploded. But this time, the coverage wasn't tabloid gossip, it was admiration. Barron Trump breaks the mold, read the New York Times. The Trump legacy takes a different turn, wrote The Atlantic. And most notably, Time magazine ran a cover story titled, The Son Who Saw Through It All. When asked during an interview what inspired him to take this route, Barron's response was clear and striking. There's one thing money could never fix: emptiness. I had everything, yet I felt like I had nothing until I stopped running and started listening to myself. That's when everything changed. He didn't abandon his family. He still showed up at events, supported his father when needed, and maintained a respectful, even warm, relationship with him. But there was no longer the invisible chain linking him to a destiny he didn't choose. Donald Trump, for all his bombast and expectations, began to see something different in his son. He didn't always understand Barron's choices, but even he couldn't deny the impact. One evening at Mar-a-Lago, while sitting by the golf course, Trump looked at Barron and said, "You're doing good work, kid. Real good. I might not get all of it, but your mother would be proud." Barron smiled, not needing more than that. It was the closest thing to full acceptance he'd ever gotten from his father. It was enough. Years passed. Unmasked grew into a global movement with chapters in over 40 countries. Barron wrote a best-selling memoir, not about the White House or wealth, but about identity, mental health, and the universal human need for purpose. He eventually started a foundation that provided scholarships for young people who wanted to serve, create, or explore without being bound by family expectations or societal pressures. He traveled the world, not as a political envoy or business tycoon, but as a listener, a learner, a seeker. Barron never chased political office, never ran a company with his last name on the building. Yet his impact reverberated far louder than anyone expected. He had realized the one thing money could never fix: emotional disconnection from one's own truth. And by facing it, he didn't just change his life, he helped others change theirs. And maybe that, Barron believed, was the greatest legacy anyone could leave behind. Not a tower, not a fortune, but a path to freedom for those who didn't even know they needed it.